Welcome class to chapter 3, where we are going to cover the cool topic of consciousness. And I'd like to first start off with talking to the class about the idea of meditation and the beneficial effects it can have in terms of reducing stress in your life, reducing anxiety and depression, and increasing focus and concentration as well, and giving one a sense of peace of mind. Practicing it in the morning, like for 10 minutes, or in the evening, or morning and evening for 10 minutes, can have a dramatic effect, positive effect on one's performance throughout the day, their emotions, stress level, as well as positive sleep in terms of doing it before bed and stuff. So the book also talks about it too, and there's been a lot of research on how certain areas of the brain, people that are depressed, when they do meditation, like mindfulness meditation for a month, are able to, they do pre and post brain scans, and they show areas of their brain that are indicative of that they're depressed actually diminish in terms of activation, showing that, and they also report that they're not as depressed. So it's really fascinating research, especially the ability of neuroimaging and how we can really look, researchers can look at the brain and see different areas that are activated. One of the cool techniques or meditation techniques that I like to use is to a mixture of concentrative and mindfulness meditation, where you sit up straight, take some nice, easy, deep, gentle breaths. And the first component is you focus your awareness on the sensation of your breath, for example, the air passing your nostrils, and then the air passing your lips on the way out. Of course, you just kind of keep breathing out and taking really deep, gentle breaths. When you breathe in, letting your stomach expand, and breathe out, letting it collapse again. And so the first component is to pay attention to the sensation of your breath. And then the second component is what you'll notice is that your mind starts to wander. And what you want to do is notice it, and non-judgmentally you can just label it as, my mind is wandering. Notice the thought. Let it go, don't try and grasp onto it in any way, and return your awareness back to the sensation of the breath. And so hopefully try that out. There's a bunch of information on different types of meditation online. You can look up mindfulness meditation and the various research, and hopefully that's something helpful for you. These are some questions that you can think about while reviewing the chapter. What is consciousness? What does it mean to be conscious? What's it like to experience it? Are there different levels? What's the relationship between the brain and consciousness? What's the global workspace model? How do split brain patients show us about, what do split brain patients show us about consciousness? And then what happens when we go to sleep, in REM sleep and such like that. Sounds like a recent song. And then there's some cool quotes. By Ramachandran. You're nothing more than behavior of vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. And the philosophical zombie, this is a discussion item, of course. And the idea is a philosophical zombie, or P-zombie in the philosophy of mind perception, is a hypothetical being that from the outside is indistinguishable from a normal human being but lacks conscious experience, qualia, or sentience. For example, if a philosophical zombie was poked with a sharp object, it would not feel any pain sensation, yet can behave exactly as it does feel pain. It may say ouch, recoil from the stimulus, and say that it is feeling pain. So the questions that I have are, can we reduce consciousness to the physical parts in the brain? What about the subjective experience of what it is like to be you? Try the zombie experiment. What if an exact physical copy of you were made? Every sort of like the Altered Carbon, if you've seen that TV show or on Netflix. And what if down to every single neuronal structure and all the different structures that make up who you are, your personality, your thoughts, your memories, etc. What if an exact physical copy of you were made? Would it be you? Would something be missing, a subjective you? So the idea with this is the difference between perhaps dualism and materialism. Is there something more than the brain that makes up you? Or are you and your thoughts, your experiences, your consciousness determined by brain activity? As Alice said, you're nothing but or as Lewis Carroll put it in Alice in Wonderland, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. I think it was, you're nothing but a pack of cards was a statement to the Queen from Alice. What is it like to be a bat? What is it like for a bat to be a bat? What if humans could metamorphose into a bat? Since our brains were not wired at birth to be a bat, could we understand what it means to be a bat? And again, kind of making you think outside the box, perhaps. Whoa, he's talking about bats. What does that have to do with psychology? But the idea is that your brain structure really gives you your experience, and the brain structure of a bat gives the bat a particular experience, which is much different than yours, for example. And I think that's why it's a good metaphor or idea or animal to look at in terms of its perceptual structure, because it so much relies not on its sight but on its hearing and sonar as well, and which is much different in terms of their perceptual experience and how they experience the world than we do. And so could we really understand what it's like to be a bat? And then the cartoon says they're pea-zombie bats. I wonder what it's like to be a bat. And then the bat says, I have no idea. Okay. Who are you? Said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for conversation, Alice replied. I hardly know, sir. Just at the present, at least I know who I was when I got up this morning. But I think I must have changed several times since then. Once upon a time, I dreamt I was a butterfly. Suddenly I awoke and came to myself. Now, am I the man who dreamt I was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming I am a man? Says Ching Su. Daniel Dennett. There's no invisible boss, no central meaner, no unitary self in command of our activities and utterances. There's no internal spectator of a Cartesian theater in our heads to applaud the march of consciousness across its stage. And David Hume, the famous philosopher, the mind is a kind of theater where several perceptions successfully make their appearance, pass, repass, glide away, and mingle in an infinite variety of postures and situations. Joseph Ledoux, the famous neuroscientist, what is consciousness from moment to moment is like a pipe organ. One note plays, and that is what you are conscious about. Things play on and off constantly, yet it appears like it is unified. Consciousness is not a thing in the brain where information gets poured into it and you're aware of it. It's a constant struggle of all these circuits competing for the top to hold the stage, if it were, for that second. Ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile flooded every year because of Isis's tears of sorrow for her dead husband Osiris. The river was clearly a thou. While the rumbling of earthquake and mountains was still an angry god, the Greeks came along 1,500 years later and started to say not thou, but it. Something like the Nile was an object that could be studied scientifically. And we kind of covered these things, right? And the idea of the theory of knowledge and the arguments between Plato and Aristotle. And Aristotle with knowledge beginning with the senses, beginning of empiricism in Western thought, and Plato talking about the mind is born with innate ideas, the ability to understand math, the capability of a rational mind is embedded within the brain. And then they also talked about the mind-body problem. We reviewed this earlier too in chapter 2. Where does the mind come from? Does it arise from brain activity? Greeks and Romans said yes, study of the body. And a lot of the famous scientists, Herophilus and Galen, Vesalius, mind is derived from brain activity. And Descartes and dualism in the 1600s, the mind and the body are separate yet intertwined. Rationalism, reason is the chief source and test of knowledge rather than the experience through the senses. And then materialism and Thomas Hobbes, Gassendi, and Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. Mind is not separate from the brain. Mind activity derives from brain activity. Empiricism, all knowledge is derived from sense experience. John Locke, the mind is a tabula rasa, and you'll hear this later or we heard it earlier in chapter 1, right? But much later in a little later chapters when we talk about learning and the behaviorists, where they believe that you're born with a blank slate, and then the sense experience and the world of experience inputs and shapes your brain, right, based on reward and punishment stimuli. Stimulus and response. No innate ideas, David Hume, same idea. And then the Vaucanson's duck, you might click this link and see the mechanical duck that can do a lot of things, including defecate. And yeah, that's pretty fascinating, right? Well, in Vaucanson's duck was an example of the extent which in Europe in the 18th century became fascinated with the idea that life might be dependent not on some mysterious vitalizing substance or spiritual principle, not dualism, right? But on purely mechanical processes. And so we jump into the chapter after 11 minutes of some interesting quotes that really highlight the idea of the global workspace model, really, that your consciousness is the result of neuronal activity, brain activity, and in different areas of your brain. And so there's not one area per se that is related to consciousness, but that you have different experiences depending on where the brain activity is. Yet there may be a spot where there is that sense of I. And Joseph Ledoux, I believe, talks about that too, and I have a couple of slides that kind of relate to that. Anyway, what is consciousness? Take a look at it. It's the moment-to-moment subjective experience, which is personal and unique to each individual, and experiencing the outside world through your senses and awareness of what you're thinking. And so that's the key there, with experiencing the outside world through your senses and then awareness of what you're thinking. If you look at the case of Martin Pistorius, he's known as the ghost boy. He was in what's called a minimally conscious state, and this alertness may not be readily apparent to an outside observer. So for many, many years, he was lying there with no reaction to any of the nurses and doctors that would come in. But he was alive inside, and his brain was processing things. And they would play him something like the Barney cartoon over and over, and he just couldn't stand it, but he was like, screaming inside, please, And then there was this nurse that was really paid attention to him and what he was doing, and she noticed how his eyes would change or dilate or something like that. She would notice a change in his eyes. And she was like, I think he's experiencing things. And I think with the technology, they were able to figure out that he was. But it wasn't readily apparent to the outside observer. And then in the case of Terry Schiavo, she had unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, where she might have seemed to be reacting to external stimuli and laughing, for example. But brain scans revealed that the cortical regions that would have allowed her to consciously produce these responses were destroyed. And so that really highlights the question of what is consciousness, right? And ways to look at consciousness. Conscious means you're aware of stimuli around you and aware of your thoughts. Unconscious, not aware of stimuli around you and aware of your thoughts. Research shows that your unconscious mind is still paying attention. For example, when you're at a party and you're talking to a person, and then out of hundreds of voices or whatever, Okay, do I really go to parties with hundreds of people? Okay, maybe 10 or 20 different people talking, or a concert. Okay, there you go, they got 1,000 people. But you actually hear your name being called out, and you're like, how did I realize that? Was I listening all along? Well, part of you was, right? Ways to look at consciousness, again, normal waking state consciousness, external world, and your inner thoughts and feelings are clear to you. And so that's really the way that you experience your day-to-day life, right? And then there's altered states of consciousness created by disease or brain injury. And the book gives the example of concussion, traumatic brain injury, and coma. Occurring normally, daydreaming like you might be doing in class, or listening to this video right now with my professor that would talk really slow in college and put me to sleep. Don't take him after lunch. You might fall asleep after eating lots of turkey. And then falling asleep, actually, dreaming, and then watching TV, and then self-induced hypnosis, meditation, flow, and alcohol and drugs. Drugs are bad. Okay. Here we go. Consciousness results from brain activity. Materialism, mind is separate from the brain. Mind activity derives from brain activity, right, is this idea. For each experience, there's an associated pattern of brain activity and groups of neurons, and that activation gives rise to that particular conscious experience. So that's you, right, is you're experiencing different things, and it's depending on what's being perceived. For example, when they talked about the house and the face being superimposed, and the people that saw the face reported seeing the face, their fusiform gyrus was being activated, and that's part of your brain that recognizes faces, and which is very important, right? Especially for such social creatures that we need to really recognize faces, and especially ones that are angry with us or violent or that type of stuff, or not trustworthy and stuff. If you look at evolutionary psychology and the great Leda Cosmides at UCSB. And then the book talks about consciousness that exists, the global workspace model. We got a quote from Antonio Damasio, another great neuroscientist and professor. Consciousness exists in different parts of the brain, which we experience as a flow of mental images. The global workspace model, you used to see me like this. I don't know, maybe I'm not really on the screen. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Probably, you're like, good. Let's focus on this. Global workspace model, consciousness arises as a function of which brain circuits are active. Your total experience results from simultaneous activity of all the brain regions. No one area of the brain is responsible for general awareness. Rather, specific areas of the brain process certain types of information, and the processing in these areas produces the conscious experience. Kind of like the pipe organ, right, of that quote by Joseph Ledoux, I believe, where depending on what's going on, your brain is activating in different places and giving you those experiences. Well, what are the different areas that are being accessed? This gives you kind of a visual here and a visual. This is one from the text, right? But they are prefrontal cortex, attention related to self-control, social processes, empathy, and guilt. We saw that with the injury from Phineas Gage, right? Where he had some issues with self-control, social processes, also planning in the future, empathy and guilt. Primary motor and associational cortex related to movement. Primary somatosensory and associational cortex related to touch. Remember I talked about how there's, I read some research about how people were putting strips in people's brains and that couldn't move, and then the brains were allowing them eventually train their brains to control the mech, structure so they can move their bodies. Super cool, right? And then primary visual associational cortex, vision, recognizing objects, fusiform face area, face recognition, auditory, hearing, Broca's and Wernicke's area for speech production and understanding of speech. And then, again, this is another slide that we reviewed in chapter 2, where we were talking about the visual associational cortex. So not only do you have the primary associational cortex, which takes a look at simple patterns, but you also have this higher order association, which really enables you to, integrates with memory and different things. Visual associational cortex responds when eye looks at complex patterns, images of objects, abstract forms, faces, fusiform face area, for example. Auditory associational cortex, what sounds mean, responds to bird calls or speech sounds versus pure tones. Somatosensory associational cortex recognizes objects by touch. Like you close your eyes and put some keys in your hand and you're like, oh yeah, those are definitely my keys. And various higher order, motor associational and higher order associational cortex. Complex processing associated with planning, language, thinking, stuff like that. And I understand plans. I'm all about movement. I'm aware of space. I see things and I hear things. And so different areas of the brain related to these different functions, right? And they're all integrated. So again, there's some specificity. No one area, right, is related to one thing, but so they're all working together, but there also is some specificity, right? And you know that because when you have injury to certain areas, then some of those things, those functions that we just talked about, tend to disappear, or they the patients have problems with those. Then the book talks about Daniel Kahneman and his idea of thinking, or his ideas of System 1 and System 2 thinking, which come from his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and his research with Amos Tversky. But Daniel Kahneman is a winner of the Nobel Prize in economics, but he's a psychology professor. And he talked about System 1 and System 2 thinking. The consciousness involves attention. And so you have this thinking fast and thinking slow. The thinking fast is the System 1 thinking. It's fast, automatic, effortless. It's also emotional, stereotypical, unconscious, associational. Uses an informal decision-making process based on heuristics, rule of thumb, and world knowledge. So it's quick, it's going to protect you, but it's prone to error a lot of times. You can see that an object is greater distance than one another, localize the source of a specific sound, complete the phrase war and, display disgust when seeing a gruesome image, solve 2 + 2 equals, drive a car on an empty road, come up with a good chess move, you're a chess master, connect the description, a person who is quiet and structured with an eye for details to a specific job. Are they a farmer or a librarian? What would you guess? Well, most people would say librarian, but if you look at the percentages of farmers compared to librarians, there's a greater percentage of farmers. And had your System 2 thought about that, you might have got the right answer. You might have anyway, right? Well, we'll see. System 2, this won't be on the quiz. This System 2 is slow, effortful, infrequent, logical, calculating, conscious. Okay, so it is effortful. And then infrequent. So you have the two right together, right? It's effort, really. Do people want to put in a lot of effort most of the time? Probably not. Solve 17 times 24. You don't have to do that right now. But it's probably close to 400, right? Because 17 is only 3 from 20. And 24, 4 from 20. Over 400. A little over 400. And it ends with 8. So, yeah, eyeball it, right? That was my System 1 thinking. The System 2, you get there too, a little longer. Determine the price quality ratio of 2 washing machines. Determine the validity of complex logical reasoning. Look out for the woman with the red dress. Determine the Matrix. Gotta love the Matrix, right? Determine the appropriateness of behavior in a social setting. Parking in a tight parking space. Statistical thinking, scientific method. This is not what politicians want you to use, right? They want you to engage in your System 1 thinking, fear. Okay, so those are the two ideas. Daniel Kahneman, it's a really great book. One of the greatest books, I think, in psychology. Top 20, put it up there. Top 10, maybe. Maybe top 10. Unconscious processing sometimes affects behavior. So this stuff and some other stuff that I'm going to show you, it's really, a lot of stuff comes from Kahneman too, that I'll show you a little later. But it's the idea that you have two types of thinking going on, all right? You have this unconscious processing going on. that's processing things in the background, even though you're consciously aware of stuff. And you're focusing on something. This unconscious thing is listening for things like having your name called out, or if you're listening to this British guy talk and all of a sudden he talks about like, I can't remember what it was, like his hairy back, or I forget what it was. It was something that didn't match with the British guy's voice. All of a sudden your physiological responses change as if you notice that. And so the idea is that there's there's an unconscious mind that's listening. I can't quite remember what the British guy, what he actually said. So he said something about hair on his back or something. I can't remember. But it didn't match. And so it was like the person's physiological responses were just like, hey, what the heck is going on with that? And so it's kind of cool to think about, right? That you have an unconscious mind that's processing things and providing you information. Okay, because the conscious mind is limited, right? It's the tip of the iceberg, but you have this unconscious mind that's all processing things. Where does it come out? Perhaps in dreams, who knows? But certainly it can be affected, and the book talks about with subliminal. Having trouble there. What was that? I forget the George Bush thing where he was like, it sounded like that. Nuclear. Is that nuclear or something like that? Subliminal? Something like that. Subliminal perception. The processing of information by sensory systems without a person's conscious awareness. Okay, so the reason why I just brought up that, I think I did that. That was like a, whatever, parapraxis, Freudian slip, was I was reading about the George Bush thing with Al Gore, where he flashed really quickly the word rat on one of the commercials. And anyway, so maybe that invaded my consciousness there. Processing information by sensory systems without a person's conscious awareness. Can you really flash like images of popcorn really quickly to the moviegoers and then increase your popcorn sales? Yes. I think so. Pictures and words can activate related semantic and affective categories in complete absence of conscious visual awareness. For example, Nisbet and Wilson, participant viewed the words ocean and moon and then viewed a single word such as detergent. Typically, they would associate the word tide when asked why they stated it was the detergent that their mom used, but in reality, what were they doing? They were being cued, right? Excuse me, by the ocean and moon. So many ways that you can be primed, you can mention words like grateful and kind, stuff like that, and people give you like better ratings, stuff. I like that teacher for some reason. I don't know why. So you can be primed with all kinds of things. But you can check that out. It's another thing. You can be primed like people. It's a little ridiculous, but like people get aggressive when they're like they honk at people when they haven't gone on the green light, and they have a gun rack. Obviously, they're the Confederate that's working for the researcher, but like, why would you honk at people more that have a gun rack versus the other group that the control group didn't have a gun rack? You know, it's like, really? Or people get more aggressive towards the researchers and stuff, or more annoyed when there's like a weapon in the room, stuff like that. And it's like, wow. So there's unconscious things at work here. Looking at like, why do people bean batters in the heat of summer when it gets above a certain degree and stuff? It's probably something Malcolm Gladwell looked at. But Kahneman talks about it too. Subliminally presented math formulas can prime correct and quicker solutions, Kahneman found. And so you prime people really quickly with math formulas, boom, where it's not even in their conscious awareness. And then later they're given math formulas and their brains have already been working on it. That's pretty cool, right? Okay, so as a counselor, you could prime people with stuff of like different ways to make them be more confident or more problem solving and stuff like that. Okay, did I do that? Probably as a counselor, yeah, to positively manipulate people into wanting to problem solve or something like that. Sort of a Milton Erickson technique, but on a different note. Cues in the environment are unconsciously processed and influence future behavior. Food cues, for example, activity in brain reward regions predicted future weight gains. So when you were presented with food cues, like awesome food, don't look at like late night, pictures of food and stuff like that. And then there's activity in the brain reward regions. Well, guess what? Boom, future weight gain for those people. So if you have activity in those reward regions going off when you think of like toppers or pizza, or you probably don't have toppers where you're at, but it's free bomb pizza, and you like woo woo, then you're probably going to go eat Toppers pizza. I have a joke that to my classes that whenever my daughter and I want Toppers pizza, we don't eat out a lot, just try and save money, but we'll mention it on like Monday, and then by the time like Thursday comes around, wife doesn't really want to cook or anything like that. I don't feel like cooking. Be like, hey, she says, you want to get Toppers? My daughter and I look at each other. Sure, what a great idea. Picture of eyes in the workplace influences whether workers steal pens, really. So you're not going to steal pens if you have eyes, just pictures of eyes on the wall. I should put up some pens in my office. Split brain condition, which corpus callosum is surgically cut, and as a result, the two hemispheres of the brain do not receive information directly from each other. Just as the brain has been split in two, so is the conscious mind. Provides many important insights in the basic organization and specialized functions of each brain hemisphere, called lateralization. And brain and mind are built from discrete units or modules. Okay. Split brain experiment. Hemispheres normally work together. By contrast, in split brain patients, the hemispheres are separated, so communication between the hemispheres cannot take place. This split allows psychologists to separately test the functions of the two hemispheres. So again, that's called lateralization. And it's the idea that there are specialized areas. Okay, the brain is all working together, right? Yes, but split in the corpus callosum, now we can really see how there are these specialized areas of functioning. The left hemisphere is better with language, processes the right visual field information, and controls the right side body movements. So you are sitting in class on one side, on the left side, and you're processing that information with what? So you're looking from here and you're looking over there. So that's going to your left brain. And if you're on the right side and you're looking at the information, that information is going to your right brain initially, right? Well, you don't have a corpus callosum severed, so you're going to be doing cross-brain processing. But kind of interesting, just think about that, okay? Certainly for the person with split brain, that's the way it's going to work, right? That their language processes are going to be better in their left hemisphere, and their right visual field information and their right side body movements are going to be controlled by their left hemisphere, okay? And vice versa on the right hemisphere in terms of the visual field and control of body movements, right? It's going to be the left side of the body, and the left visual field is going to go over to the right. And the right hemisphere is better with spatial relationships, but not with language, okay? And that's an important thing to remember for the next slide, or the next one after this, but this one too. When a person with split brain is asked what he sees, the left hemisphere processes the fork on the right side of the screen and can verbalize that. So remember, he sees what? He sees the fork over there. He can't see both, okay? That's what you probably don't realize with this, but he can only see one, right? Okay, so he looks over there, and what does he see? He sees a fork, and he can say fork. Now he looks over there, and that information is going to his right side, right? His right hemisphere. And he can't verbalize it because it's going to his right hemisphere, and his right hemisphere can't talk to his left hemisphere, right? So that information is going to his right hemisphere. Can't verbalize it, but he can grab it, right? Up. he can grab it with his left hand, right? Okay, got that? Okay, I think we got it. So in this case, remember they can't see, each brain is isolated in what it can see. The left brain sees this, the chicken leg, and then the right brain sees the house with snow on it. Okay? Right there. Okay. Person with split brain watches different images flash simultaneously on the left and the right. Below the screen is a row of other images. Person is asked to point each hand at the bottom image, most related to the image flash on that side of the screen. The left hemisphere points the right hand at the picture of the chicken head. Okay, left hemisphere sees chicken claw, points correctly with right hand, and it says chicken claw goes with the chicken head when asked, because it can say what it is, right? Boom. But the right hemisphere can't say what it is, okay? And it's trying to tell the left hemisphere what it is, okay? Right hemisphere points to the left hand at the picture of the snow shovel, okay? So the right hemisphere with the left hand says snow. Left brain, snow. It's snow. This is what you do, a snow shovel. Okay? When asked later to explain these selections, the left hemisphere can provide the answers verbally. Chicken goes with claw, and that's what it saw, right? The left hemisphere. And the snow shovel is used to pick up chicken manure, as it did not see the house with the snow, so it's creating an explanation for what his left hand is doing. Well, you want to make sense, you know, you're a sense-making person, so it's not working, so you're like, all right, I'm trying to make sense. In other words, the left brain, left hemisphere, is the interpreter. The sense-constructing activity in the left hemisphere is called the interpreter. This term means that the left hemisphere interprets what the right hemisphere has done, seeking order and reason even when there is none, which often leads it to mistakes. It tends to overgeneralize, frequently creating a potential pass as opposed to a true one. The right brain produces factual information, and the left brain tries to make sense of the information and verbalize it. And then this is just, I'm probably going over, way over. So just a little information about possibly where is the sense of self. Antonio Damasio has an idea of that. And he thinks there's different types of self, the core self, autobiographical self, and proto-self, which I'm not going to go over in this video, but I have some information about it. And then that sense of I is probably located in your brainstem, where you kind of collect from moment to moment your state of your physical structure as well as your brain activity. And it's kind of integrating both. So, okay. So hopefully that was helpful. Didn't cover the whole chapter, but hope you had fun looking at consciousness.